never forget the day in school that I learned about the Battle of New Orleans. It happened in January of 1815. I didn't remember that off the top of my head. I had to look that up. And my teacher told us about it, and she gave us the whole run-up. I mean, we had been covering the War of 1812 for, I don't know, 2 or 3 days, something like that. We were reading about it in our homework and everything. She, I think rightly, framed the War of 1812 as the real Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War, the War of American Independence that happened in the 1770s, she argued, and many historians argue as well, wasn't going to stick. That Britain was just too powerful. They had too many concerns in other places, and they were just sort of reloading and on their way back to sort things out and finish things off with the Americas after the Battle of Yorktown and what they probably viewed as more of a ceasefire and just a reloading pause period. And by the time you get around to the fall of 1814, the war is winding down. It seems to be going in the favor of the United States. But New Orleans is a problem, because a whole lot of the grand plan and scheming that happened with some United States British loyalists and the British government involved carving up the United States using the Mississippi and kind of a weird rendezvous point coming up the Gulf from New Orleans. There's all this stuff that went into it. Getting New Orleans under control was a very big, very important objective to cut off that access point. And so there's this whole thing going on called the Gulf Campaign. And during that campaign, which started in the fall of 1814. Again, I didn't remember that either. I had to look up that date. It was led by Andrew Jackson, a future president. Jackson had to fight nature and the British real hard to make it to New Orleans. And then on January 8th, 1815, the famous Battle of New Orleans happened. Johnny Horton, is that the guy's name, or is that the name of the restaurant in Canada? Are they the same? I don't remember. Somebody Horton. It's Johnny Horton, right? Has a song about the Battle of New Orleans. I'm just leaving it. I don't care if I'm wrong. It's just going to be that entertaining, and everybody from Canada and who knows about 20th century American folk music can make fun of me. But I used to know the words to it and everything. And then 1815 took a little trip along with General Jackson down the mighty Mississippi, and then I don't remember. It tells the story of the battle. Like I said, I used to know it, and it was really catchy. And this is just a legendary battle in American history. But I remember learning about this and why it was so significant and how it factored into the United States really shoring up its independence. It was all fascinating, riveting stuff. And then as a footnote, I remember my teacher was like, yeah, and one crazy thing about it is that actually the whole war was over. 15 days earlier, the Treaty of Ghent had been signed back in Europe. They just didn't get word about it yet until then. So that's kind of funny. At any rate, great and glorious victory. I just remember thinking, well, but wait, that last thing you said, this kind of a big deal. So there was a whole battle that involved thousands of casualty and dead, and it was for a war that was already decided. I remember asking my teacher, who was a wonderful teacher, by the way, what do I do with that? It seems like, why couldn't they have just figured that out? And she just explained logistics. Remember, this is like 6th grade for me, so I just hadn't thought all this stuff through. She just explained like, it would take this long to get the message from there all the way. I mean, there's a whole procedural thing. It's just slow. The war was over. It was settled. It was done. The battle didn't need to be fought, but there would be no way to let anybody know that. I still think that's a pity, but her explanation was good. Here's what I'm driving at. We're in the same kind of situation here as we get toward the end of the book of Esther. We've got a thing that has been set in motion. It is rolling. It is moving. And when you read through the story, it's easy to fixate on the reason for not just immediately stopping Haman's plan to destroy the Jewish people. It's easy to fixate on the reason for that being that you just can't undo laws. Once a law is said, it's just how things are. And I've talked a lot about how that is a very Darian Xerxesian phenomenon. And it is. They had even more reason to do it than others. But this is the way of the ancient Near East. This is the way of the ancient Mesopotamian world. I mean, kings don't revoke edicts. It just isn't done. So yeah, there's that element for why this ball is rolling downhill and is very hard to stop. But the other element is strictly logistical, like the deal with the War of 1812 and the Battle of New Orleans. It takes a while to sail a boat everywhere, get heralds out everywhere, get everything printed up, and try to run ahead of the metaphorical rock or snowball that's rolling downhill and get that thing stopped. So that's our next dragon that our heroes have to slay here. That's the next big hurdle that we have to overcome. The tension between Esther and Haman and Mordecai and all of that actually gets sorted out very, very quickly. It only takes a verse or so. Chapter 8, verse 1, that same day King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. Yesterday we talked about how that probably made her the wealthiest woman ever in the history of the world at this point. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her, so now we're just turning over all of the cards. And then the king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. Another huge, grand reversal. Someone who would embarrass the king and manipulate the king for his own selfish, violent ends has just been replaced by someone who would save the king's life, even when he wouldn't get anything for it. So someone better has the signet ring now, but more so what that tells us is this would reassure the original audience that if we can sort out this time bomb, this rock that's rolling downhill, if we can thwart a Battle of New Orleans style after the fact outcome here, things are going to be good for a long time, because now Mordecai has the signet ring. And much like 1980s or 90s anime or after school cartoons, there's a lot of power in the ring when you make your fist and you point it at problems. You can manifest power. That ring is a real, actual ring of power. But now somebody we trust, who we know has the Jews' best interests at heart, is the one wielding it. So that closes up that loop. But we still got to solve this one problem. So, and Esther appointed him, that being Mordecai, over Haman's estate. But now we got to go deal with the rock rolling downhill. Verse 3, Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Here we see once again Esther's shrewdness. She didn't fall at his feet when Haman was still in the game. That would be a gesture of weakness, and maybe she knew the king wouldn't like the way that would come off in front of Haman. I don't know. I don't know what her strategy was for not doing this sooner, but clearly she played her hand right, because Haman has been taken out of the picture, justice done for Mordecai. We have a future insurance policy in place with Mordecai wielding the ring now. But whenever we see this pose in the Bible, I am reminded of stuff in the New Testament that is overtly and explicitly about the idea of assuming the right posture before the king. Practically everybody, it seems like we encounter in particularly Matthew and Luke, who's getting it right. They fall at the feet of Jesus. They're somehow at the feet of Jesus in a position of humility in this moment where they're understanding, at least in part, as best as they can, who it is that's in front of them and the royalty that is in front of them. There is a right posture before the king, and there's a wrong posture before the king. The wrong posture is haughtiness and arrogance, and the people who don't understand who Jesus is, that is the stiff-necked posture they assume before the true King of Kings. And again, the people who get it right, they run up to him and fall at his feet, like the Canaanite woman, or though maybe not all of the blind characters are physically able to figure out exactly where Jesus' feet are right off the bat, they verbally assume a right posture before the king. Depart from me, Lord, from a sinful man. Peter assumes the right posture before the king. The various women who anoint Jesus with oil or even swab his feet with their hair, they are assuming a right posture before the king. And so anytime I see this motif, this visual picture anywhere in the Bible, my brain goes right to that. Here, Esther knows that the only right play at this point is complete humility and supplication before this flawed temporal king. So she begs him to put an end to the evil plan. And, well, the point of tension is, will the king continue to think favorably toward Esther at this point? He has at every other turn. I suppose at this point you would assume he would, but now the stakes are different. Now the equation is different. Will he respond positively or have his good graces run out and the heroes will have to run down around the rock and try to stop this dangerous thing that is in motion in some other way? Here's our answer. Esther 8, verse 4. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. So what we can glean from this, based on the ground rules that you and I have learned from extra biblical sources, including art from the Persian palace at Persepolis and even Pasargadae, and from what we've seen in other parts of the book of Esther, is that extending that scepter means she is being granted an audience. You have asserted yourself at the great king in a very bold, in this case, very emotional, very loud, very demonstrative way. That is risky, but here's the scepter again. And as we pause, I think we're pausing with at least a reasonable degree of hope that a Battle of New Orleans after the fact type situation might be avoided here. All right, I'm Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.